Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I would like to welcome you to episode 83 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today it is my distinct pleasure to have with us Jon Rydberg. Jon is the founder of the Orchid Advisory Group. Jon is the former Chief Compliance Officer at Smith & Wesson. Jon is going to visit with us today about the compliance ecosystem and several other topics relating to compliance across a variety of spectrums. I hope you enjoy the episode. Thank you.
Of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. It is my distinct privilege and pleasure to have with me today my good friend and former colleague, Jon Rydberg. Welcome and thanks for taking time on your busy Labor Day to visit with me, Jon.
Thank you, Tom. Happy to be here.
Jon and I had a chance to work together on a project a couple of years ago in the corporate world, and Jon has subsequently left and founded his own company, compliance company, called Orchid Advisors. And I say compliance, but it's much broader than certainly my type of compliance, FCPA or anti-bribery and anti-corruption. Jon, could you tell our listeners, give them a little bit of your professional background and then what led you to found Orchid Advisors?
Sure, Tom. Be happy to. By way of background, I've got a pretty diverse set of experiences ranging from starting mechanical engineering on through an MBA with a focus in corporate finance, and spent a good majority of my career in the Big Four consulting environment, working for firms like Ernst & Young and Protiviti, and delivering a lot of services to anywhere from basically startups all the way up to Fortune 100 organizations, very much focused on the implementation of processes, systems, and internal controls, much of which was delivered around regulatory topics such as anti-bribery, anti-corruption, Sarbanes-Oxley, and then broader interests related to enterprise risk management. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to work at Smith & Wesson as the Chief Compliance Officer and Vice President of Internal Audit. And I was hired to work on the organization's furthering of the compliance program in the wake of DOJ SEC investigation related to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And in the course of doing so, I looked across the firearms industry and noted that there really were no consulting firms dedicated to that industry with deep expertise focused on processes and systems. So in 2012, we launched Orchid Advisors, which is now a relatively good-sized niche firm working with almost every major brand in the industry. What really sets it apart is whereas many of the other firms delivering services to the industry consist of former ATF professionals and legal professionals, we focus very, very much on the operationalizing of compliance. And again, that is re-engineering business processes, systems, and internal controls. So that brings us to present day.
Jon, you really hit on something that I think, well, first of all, I didn't realize you were an ME, so kudos to that. My dad's an ME, so always interested in folks with a mechanical engineering background. But one of the things that struck me in your remarks was the operating systems together. Sorry, I can't pronounce the word right this morning. But that kind of led me to your concept that I've heard you espouse several times of the compliance ecosystem. And that's much broader than rules and regulations, even policies and procedures, and perhaps even implementing those policies and procedures. Can you talk to us about the compliance ecosystem and how that benefits companies going forward?
Sure. The compliance ecosystem consists of four legs, if you will, and then three pieces going across horizontally, if you will. Let me start with that horizontal perspective. We are big believers that the compliance ecosystem is much broader than the compliance responsibilities of one company itself. So let's say, for example, if I were talking to a manufacturing client, the compliance ecosystem begins with their supply base, moves on to them, and then moves forward in the supply chain up to their distributors, their dealers, their wholesalers, and so forth. it's critical that a company look upstream and downstream in the compliance ecosystem, because the activities that take place at their suppliers or at their channel partners can have a dramatic impact upon their ability to comply. Furthermore, it can have a big impact on their ability to conduct business in certain markets and so forth. So let's say, for example, an organization has a key supplier, and that key supplier is delivering products in a regulated market. If that particular supplier were to be deemed non-compliant, shut down, well, that could have a dramatic impact on duty, the ability to deliver product. So that's the breadth. And that is, how does an organization's top executives build compliance into the strategic objectives and strategic plans of the organization? The second leg of the compliance ecosystem, you want me to stop there?
Yeah, because that's really something I see all the time, which is the siloed nature of compliance. Certainly compliance professionals may be very, very well versed in the regulations of their specific compliance regulation, but you're talking about it in a much broader sense. So maybe I interrupted you too soon, but you could lead into how do you convince either a compliance executive to take this broader look, or more importantly, a senior executive to do so?
So that's a great question, Tom, and I think most senior executives understand the importance of compliance, but compliance is a competing objective, or I should say the expense of implementing compliance systems is a competing objective to profitability, right? Organizations comply with what I call the proverbial duct tape and shoestring, or they can go all the way with the gold-plated version. It all depends upon the level of risk that organization wants to take on, or the level of risk of the particular industry, and so forth. So what I really try to focus on when talking to a top executive is what could really negatively impact their business. Are there any compliance events that could have impact on the enterprise value of the company? So in the prior example, I was talking about the shutdown of a key supplier that might inhibit the organization the ability to deliver its products to key customers. It's those types of discussions that tend to resonate with our clients the most.
Okay. Who are typically the people you are talking to about the compliance ecosystem? Does it start with the compliance professional and move to internal audit or others, or do you typically start your discussions with senior management? Because I'm really intrigued by this. It's a discussion that doesn't happen or occur enough, certainly in the anti-bribery, anti-corruption compliance space.
You know, it's a great question, Tom, and I actually find, interestingly enough, that it varies depending upon the regulation that I'm talking about. Now, that may sound a little odd because I think many people would default immediately to either the compliance officer or the general counsel, but that's not always necessarily the place to start. So let's say, for example, we are talking about anti-bribery and anti-corruption. Those discussions I typically would hold with the general counsel, compliance officer, and perhaps the individuals in the sales organization. But in contrast to that, and for example, our firm does a lot of work in the firearms industry in compliance with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Almost all of the compliance activities that take place that make an organization compliant or not compliant happen within the operational business processes, that is shipping, receiving, manufacturing, and selling. So I find that a lot of those discussions are had with the COO or the VP of operations. So in short, I think it depends upon the regulation, but most all of the discussions do start at the top of the organization.
You also hit on a key disconnect that I think many anti-corruption compliance professionals don't think through, which is that the violation of the FCPA, UK Bribery Act, or other anti-corruption compliance regulation is going to come through the operational side. So it's either the transference of that information to the operational side, the buy-in by that operational side, or some other way that the requirements and policies and procedures you put in place on the compliance side move into the operational side. It sounds like that's one of the discussions you're able to have when you can talk about the compliance ecosystem.
Yes, another good question, good point, Tom, right? So I've talked to a number of executives about their compliance program, especially, let's say, anti-corruption, and asked them where they stand and what they've done. And many times I get the response, well, we've trained and we have policies and procedures. It doesn't end there, right? First of all, we could draw upon the compliance framework embedded within the federal sentencing guidelines. Clearly, the U.S. government thinks that there's a much broader framework requirement to that. But just talking more practically from a day-to-day perspective, compliance happens with operational activities. The signing of a contract, the negotiating of a deal, right? The issuance of free goods, gifts, gratuities. Those are transactions, and really the implementation of internal controls into the daily operating activities can have a really, really dramatic impact on an organization's ability to comply. And sometimes training, although it's critically important, just isn't enough. So you got to take that extra step.
John, on your website of Work Advisors, you have a wide variety of compliance-related services. And I think many of my listeners certainly understand the FCPA and anti-corruption compliance. But within the firearms industry, you have a much broader range of compliance, and you detailed the ATF regulations that every firearms company must comply with. There's also export control regulations, ITAR, and other regulations that perhaps a pharmaceutical or energy industry executive or compliance officer may not have to be as well versed in. How are you able to tie together that range of what I'm going to say generally is compliance, even if it's a different discipline, such as anti-bribery, such as export controls, such as firearms regulations, and perhaps even money laundering or anti-money laundering?
So I think there's two ways to look at that. Number one, an organization looking for support in those areas has to recognize that it's going to be extremely difficult to hire any one individual who has all of that expertise. You're talking a very broad array of regulations, and they've got to go very deep. Number two, even looking for a consultant, finding one person that have all of that knowledge is tough. So you really should seek out the experts in each one of those particular areas and recognize that you might need multiple people. Inside of the organization, the other side of the question, as I hear it, is how do you manage all those multiple disparate regulations? When you really break it down to the nuts and bolts, it comes back again to the transactions, the operational activities that happen day to day. So if I look at, let's say, Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, and then I look at ATF compliance, speaking specific to firearms, and then I look at anti-corruption. Something like a shipping process can have internal controls that help the organization comply with all three of those regulations. So what I find helpful is to map out the objectives of the controls, irrespective of the regulation, and look at the processes and the transactions that affect them, and you really can achieve 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4, 5 things at one time just by focusing on the internal control.
You know, that's a great point, John, and certainly something that I think lawyers don't fully appreciate is not only the power of internal controls, but their necessity to come in under your policy and procedures. And I hope that's one of the things that I can explore in my podcast and blog going forward for the rest of the year. But if I could turn the subject a little bit to an event I'm very excited about, and it is your upcoming, let me get the correct name, I think it's Firearms Compliance Conference, which you have is scheduled for October 6th through 8th at Turnberry Isle Resort in Miami. Could you tell us about that event?
Sure, and Tom, we're happy to have you speak there, too. The audience should know that Tom's going to be delivering material related to anti-corruption, which he's an expert in. The other thing to note, too, is we're actually not a firearm company, but we've looked across the various industries. We look at operationalizing compliance. We saw a tremendous opportunity in this particular industry, so we're very, very laser-focused right now. And the unique thing about this conference as opposed to other conferences in the industry, the others focus a little bit more on here are the latest updates in the regulations, or here are the new products available to the market. So we asked the question, so you've been taught the regulations. Now what? How do you implement? How do you know what processes to put in? Do you know what new technology exists? What new audit practices exist, for example? So the primary purposes of this conference is to look up and down that supply chain and figure out what processes and systems enable compliance the most. And we think it's going to be a fantastic conference.
And will there be discussions around some of the things that you talked about, John, which is a much more broader and holistic approach to the compliance ecosystem, so that professionals like myself fully understand how the Export Control Department and the money laundering or anti-money laundering folks, we can all get together to create a set of basic internal controls and then have the specific needs as our regulations would require?
Yes, great question. There's going to be a broad range of topics delivered by both regulators as well as practitioners. The practitioner presentations will be focused more so on compliance aspects within the ecosystem. The first general session that will be delivered by myself will be focused on that very topic of the compliance ecosystem and how the overall framework can work for any industry and really any regulation or set of regulations.
Well, John, I'm very excited to attend this event. I think you've really hit on something that is going to take compliance generally to the next level, which is the compliance ecosystem that I would know you have trademarked, and we'll move forward on. We're near the end of our time, but I wanted to end with a short discussion of the book that we co-authored. And the book's called Anti-Bribery Leadership, and John and I put this book out. And, John, what I wanted to ask is, as I think most everyone knows, I'm a lawyer and indeed a recovering trial lawyer, and you come from a much different background. So our writing styles were significantly different in the book. But what has been the response you have seen to the folks that you have been able to provide the book to, and what are some of the comments you've received back on the book?
So the response has been very, very positive. The type of comments I get are simple, understandable, effective, right? If you were to search on Amazon for books on anti-corruption or Foreign Corrupt Practice Act, UK Bribery Act, you'll find books of significant length, 300 pages, 500 pages, 250 pages, right? That can be a lot to get through, especially for the corporate board member or the CEO. So, Tom, as you know, we focused on a short piece, about 100 pages in length, that's really built for everybody at those levels, whether you're running a public company or you're the owner of a public company, a CEO or general counsel. You can get the information that you need to run or to govern the organization as it relates to anti-corruption practices. And that's what people seem to appreciate most.
Well, John, and from my perspective, I would add, first of all, Matt Kelly wrote a very gracious review, which I think his lead line was, "It ain't Shakespeare." But it wasn't designed to be Shakespeare. It was designed exactly as you have said. It was to give the senior manager, C-suite exec, general counsel, board member who doesn't have a lot of time to read a 200 or 300-page book, the basics on what they need and that they can communicate that to their organization. And I was a little surprised, frankly, about the length. Because it actually comes in at about 60 pages, but people really appreciated having something small-ish and smaller that's available both on ebook and in hard copy. So I found it to be quite well received myself. John, we're near the end of our time, and really I want to thank you for the opportunity to visit. If people wanted to find out more about Orchid Advisors, can you point them to a place they could go?
Sure. The best place would be our website, and that is, of course, www.orchidadvisors.com, and that's orchid like the flower. And there's a contact form on there. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. But there's a lot of information about our products and services and a tremendous amount of blogs and white papers where you can actually find practices to implement at your organization. So thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate it.
Well, John, thanks very much, and I hope you have a good Labor Day.
All right, you too. Take care.
All right.